Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Eduyot. We are up to Perek Gimel Mishnah Vav. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilui Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Ranbai Eliyahu ben Bulcha Israelov Chana bad Miriam Sason ben Ryan Yoshua ben Shifra Menuchatam began Eden Amen Lehavdil ben Chaim lechaim v'derefua shenemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa betoch Shachol Israel and Achlama Merav Binyamin Od Zion Chai ben Dvorah. The Mishnah cites the final dispute between Rabbi Dosa and the sages. A Kohen's wife and daughters are allowed to eat his tirumah. However, if his wife or daughter cohabits with an idolater even against her will, tirumah becomes prohibited to her. The Tanaim discuss a case in which a Kohen's wife or daughter was captured by idolaters and it is not known whether she was violated. Hashivuya ochelet bitrumah divrei Rabbi Dosa. A woman, the wife or daughter of a Kohen, who was captured by idolaters, may eat tirumah because we do not suspect that she was violated. These are the words of Rabbi Dosa. V'chachamim omrim, but the sages say, yesh shivuya ochelet ve'yesh shivuya she'ena ochelet. There is one type of captured woman who may eat tirumah, and there is another type of captured woman who may not eat tirumah. According to the sages, we generally do suspect that a captured woman was violated. However, if she claims that this did not happen, there is one situation where she is believed and another situation where she is not believed. Ketzad, how so? Haisha shamra nishbeti uteorani. If the woman said, I was captured, but I am pure, I was not violated, ochelet, she is believed and may eat tirumah. Sha'apesh she'asar u'apesh she'etir. Because the mouth that prohibited her to eat tirumah is the same mouth that permitted her to eat tirumah. Had this woman not said anything, she would certainly be allowed to eat tirumah, since there is no evidence that she was captured. Since she could have kept quiet, but instead admitted that she was captured, which should prohibit her to eat tirumah, it is clear that she is telling the truth. Therefore, when she adds that she was not violated, which permits her to eat tirumah, we believe her. Although the sages suspect that a woman captured by idolaters was violated, they assume in this case that she remained pure. This is based on the rule of migu, which is used to determine whether a person is telling the truth. If someone can make a strong claim, one that is more likely to be believed or that gives him more rights, and he chooses to make a weak claim instead, the rule of migu tells us that he is telling the truth, because if he wanted to lie, he would have made the strong claim. In our case, had the woman wanted to lie, she would have made the strong claim, I was not captured, or better yet, remain silent. Therefore, when she makes the weaker claim, I was captured, but I was not violated, she is presumably telling the truth. However, if there are witnesses who testify that she was captured, and she says, I am pure, and now she is not believed, and she may not eat tirumah. In this case, where it is known that she was captured, she may not eat tirumah. In this case, where it is known that she was captured, which is enough to make tirumah prohibited to her, she could not have kept quiet and still be allowed to eat tirumah. Therefore, we have no reason to believe her when she says that she was not violated. The rule of migu applies only where the person has the option of making a stronger claim. In this case, however, the woman cannot make the strong claim of denying that she was captured or remaining silent, because witnesses testify that she was captured. Therefore, the rule of migu cannot be used here to give credibility to her claim that she was not violated. And that is the end of Mishnah Vav. Having finished citing the disputes between Rabbi Dosa and the sages, Mishnah Zayin records a dispute between Rabbi Yoshua and the sages. This Mishnah, which also appears in Torah chapter 6, Mishnah 2, deals with 4 situations where it is possible that a ta'or person or object became tameh, but we do not know for sure. The general rule in such cases is that if the doubt arose in a private domain, we treat the item in question as tameh, but if the doubt arose in a public domain, we assume that it remained ta'or. This rule is learned from the Torah. A private domain in this context is a place in which there were fewer than 3 people when the doubt arose, and a public domain is one in which 3 or more people were present. In the Mishnah's 4 situations, the doubt arose in a private domain, but the Tanaim disagree whether this preceding rule applies. There are 4 cases of doubt where Rabbi Yoshua rules that the item in question became tameh, but the sages ruled that it remained tahor. Ketzad, how so? What are these cases? Hatameh omed v'tahor over. Number 1, a tameh person, specifically a mitzorah, was standing under a roof in a private domain, and a Tahor person passed close by in the private domain, and it is not known whether the Mitzorah transmitted Tumah to the Tahor person. A Mitzorah is a person who has one of the skin afflictions described in the book of Vayikra, chapter 13, which makes a person Tameh. These afflictions are known as Tzarat. A Mitzorah is Tameh with Ava Tumah, and he transmits Tumah to people or things that he touches or carries. He also transmits Tumah to a person who touches, carries, or moves him. In addition, if a Mitzorah enters a roofed area, for example, a house or the space under the branches of a tree, and stops there for a moment, he transmits Tumah to all people and things under that roof. This last method of transmission is similar to oil, which is one of the ways Tumah is transmitted by a corpse, but there are some differences. In the Mishnah's case, we know that the Mitzorah was standing under a roof and a Tahor person was walking close by, but we do not know whether the Tahor person went under the roof and became Tameh from the Mitzorah. Alternatively, the doubt is as follows. We know that the Tahor person did not go under the roof, but it is possible that he touched or moved the Mitzorah, which would also make him Tameh. In this case and the next, both the Mitzorah and the Tahor person were in a private domain. As we said in the introduction to the Mishnah, the general rule is that when a question of Tumah arises in a private domain, the Torah declares that Tumah was indeed transmitted. The Tanaim of our Mishnah disagree whether that rule applies here. However, if the Mitzorah and the Tahor person were in a public domain, all would agree that the Tahor person remains Tahor. For when a question of Tumah arises in a public domain, it is assumed that Tumah was not transmitted. But again, back to our Mishnah's case. That was case number 1. Case number 2, how Tahor Omed v'Tameh Over. A Tahor person was standing under a roof in a private domain, and a Tameh person, a Mitzorah, passed close by in the private domain, and it is not known whether the Mitzorah transmitted Tumah to the Tahor person. Although a Mitzorah transmits Tumah to items that are under the same roof as him, that law applies only if he was still for a moment. If he never stopped but kept on walking, he does not transmit Tumah. It says in Negaim, chapter 13, Mishnah 7. Therefore, in the Mishnah's case, even if it is known that the Mitzorah was under the roof while the Tahor person was standing there, we cannot be sure that the Mitzorah transmitted Tumah because we do not know whether he stopped for a moment or kept moving. In the previous case, however, where the Mitzorah was standing under a roof, the Tahor person was walking nearby, the question is whether the Tahor person went under the roof at all. If he did, he certainly became Tameh, no matter whether he stopped or kept moving. As long as the Mitzorah stands still, he transmits Tumah even to a person or object that is in motion, as it says in Negaim, chapter 13, Mishnah 7. Here too, the doubt can be based on a different possibility. Even if the Mitzorah certainly did not transmit Tumah by means of the roof, either because he never went under the roof or because he did not stop there, it is possible that he made the Tahor person Tameh by touching or moving him. Number 3, Tumah Birshut Echid v'Tahora Birshut Arabim. A Tameh item was in a private domain that opened to a public domain, and the Tahor item was in the public domain, and it is not known whether the Tahor item entered the private domain and received Tumah from the Tameh item. If the Tahor item entered the private domain, there are a number of ways through which it could have become Tameh. One possibility is that it touched the Tameh item there. Another possibility is that if the Tameh item is a corpse or part of a corpse, it could have transmitted Tumah by means of oil. A third possibility, which applies only where the Tahor item is a person, is that the person could have become Tameh by carrying or moving the Tameh item. Besides not knowing whether Tumah was transmitted in any of these preceding ways, we do not know whether the Tahor item even entered the private domain. If, however, it certainly did enter the private domain, and the only question is whether it touched, for example, the Tameh item, everyone agrees that it became Tameh, since both items were definitely in the private domain at the time the possible transmission would have occurred. It would be a clear case of questionable Tumah in a private domain. We all agree that the Tahor item is assumed to have become Tameh. Case number 4, Tahora Birshut Echid v'Tumah Birshut Arabim. A Tahor item was in a private domain that opened to a public domain, and a Tameh item was in the public domain, and it is not known whether the Tameh item has entered the private domain and transmitted Tumah to the Tahor item. Here too, we do not know whether the Tameh item even entered the private domain and then transmitted Tumah to the Tahor item there, either through touching it or by one of the other methods of transmission. However, if we do know that the Tameh item entered the private domain, and we are unsure only whether it transmitted Tumah there, all would agree that Tumah was indeed transmitted. There are 3 possible ways in which Tumah could have been transmitted in each of these 4 cases. Safek Naga, Safek Lo Naga. Either there is a doubt whether or not one item, either the person or object, touched the other. Safek He'ehil, Safek Lo He'ehil. Or there is a doubt whether or not Tumah was transmitted by means of a roof. Safek Esit, Safek No Esit, or there is a doubt whether one item moved the other. The Mishnah now cites a dispute. Rabbi Yehoshua metameh. Rabbi Yehoshua rules that in each of the 4 cases the Torah item became tameh. The Chachamim metarin, but the sages rule that it remains ta'or. According to Rabbi Yehoshua, since the possible transmission would have taken place in a private domain, we apply the general rule that when a doubt arises in a private domain, the Torah item is assumed to have become tameh. According to the sages, however, the rule does not apply in the first 2 cases which involve a mitzvah, because the rule does not include tumah transmitted by a mitzvah. The sages maintain that the rule of questionable tumah in a private domain does not apply to tumah transmitted by a mitzvah. Therefore, where the possible source of tumah is a mitzvah, we fall back on the standard principle of chazakah, which states that things are assumed to have stayed the same unless we know that they changed. In our case, therefore, the ta'or person is assumed to remain ta'or, since there is no proof that he became tameh. And the rule does not apply in the last 2 cases where we do not know whether the item in the public domain remained there or entered the private domain, because the rule does not include situations where it is possible that one of the items remained in the public domain. Although the transmission of tumah, if it happened, would have taken place in the private domain, we do not actually know whether the item that started out in the public domain, the Torah item in the 3rd case, the tameh item in the 4th case, entered the private domain at all, and might have stayed in the public domain the entire time. Therefore, according to the sages, these are treated as doubts that arose in the public domain, where the assumption is that the Torah item remained tahor. And the Rav tells us that Alayev does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua. And that is the Nabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.